Somebody alive.
Of course I will be talking from there.
Bona tarda a tots, benvinguts. La Càtedra Ferrater Mora de la Universitat de Girona ha convidat aquest any, després de 24 anys d'existència, el professor Zygmunt Bauman. I tenim el goig que el Centre Cultural de Mercè el convidi també avui a fer una sessió oberta per la ciutadania. Jo agraeixo molt que la Mercè em convidi a mi a fer la presentació del professor Bauman. De fet, Bauman és un dels intel·lectuals més importants, a ell li sabrà greu que ho digui, tant és, més importants, més rellevants de l'actualitat. Vostès, tots vostès, els d'aquesta sala i els de no sé quantes sales més aquí, oi, en són testimonis de l'interès que suscita una persona que no només pensa amb seriositat i amb profunditat els temes, sinó que els sap explicar i comunicar molt bé. Per això estem tan i tan contents de tenir-lo aquí. Per nosaltres és un privilegi, és un honor, és una gran satisfacció. Estic segur que vostès ho aprofitaran i en gaudiran moltíssim. La idea és que ell faci una exposició, després farem un minut de pausa, i hi podrà haver intervencions per part de vostès, preguntes, si volen, que les podran fer en català perfectament, perquè hi ha traducció simultània i per tant ell tindrà els auriculars i ho podrà sentir en traducció simultània. El que passa és que ja des d'ara els agrairia molt que no es fessin més discursos que el seu, és a dir, que el que hi hagués fossin preguntes, si és que algú en té alguna. Si no en tenen cap, com que ell també ho apreciarà, simplement l'atenció que vostès li prestaran. Ja dic que és un privilegi tenir el professor Bauman aquí amb nosaltres, privilegi que es produeix poques vegades a aquest nivell i per això n'estem tan contents. Avui ens parlarà, ell va proposar diversos títols. La veritat és que confesso que vaig ser jo el que vaig triar el títol definitiu perquè em va semblar que l'inventor del terme modernitat líquida ja era conegut justament per això. És una expressió absolutament fantàstica, però que segurament que molts de vostès coneixien aquest terreny del seu pensament més que no pas altres. I per això quan ell va proposar el tema d'Europa, naixement o mort agònica, va semblar que era un tema absolutament esplèndid. La crisi europea, els sentiments barrejats que tenim avui els europeus, que puguin passar una mica per el sedàs d'una ment lúcida i crítica com la seva. És per això que avui parlarà d'Europa, naixement o mort agònica. Professor Bauman, moltíssimes gràcies per ser aquí.
Thank you very much, Professor Terry Barras. Well, you raised expectations of the audience very high, and I have a problem now how to meet your promises. As you probably gathered from the title of the lecture, the problem of Europe being in pains at the moment is not a question. It's not put in doubt. That's not a problem for the message I want to convey. I assume that you would agree with me that we, the Europeans, are in some kind of pain. And the real question, the mystery which needs to be penetrated, resolved, is what sort of pains they are. As Professor Barras already mentioned, it is either birth pangs, pains which are associated with something new being born, or is it the pains preceding the agony, the terminal pains? That's the big question which we are now confronting, and there's no good answer, as far as I am concerned anyway, at the moment, to this question, to this dilemma which we all confront. In considerable degree, the answer to this question will be made, it doesn't exist yet, will be made by all of us action, one way or the other, on our determination, our preferences, our ability to design proper solutions, or our being prone to making mistakes and taking the wrong path. I warn you, ladies and gentlemen, I am not going to answer any question about the future of Europe. I don't have a hotline to God Almighty. I don't know what is written up there for our future, and I don't know. I don't have any qualifications and skills of a prophet. I am a sociologist. We sociologists can explain very precisely anything, but providing it has already happened. But our ability to predict the future are exactly the same as everybody else here. I am dabbling in sociology for more than 60 years. I can vouch that I haven't learned the skills of prophesizing. So there will be not about future. It will be rather about the moment in which we are now, and first of all, how it happened that we came here, that we arrived into this moment, and secondly, what sort of dilemmas confront us, what are the problems which are confront us today. But today we are in a situation which the ancient creator, actually, of the medical profession, Hippocrates, dubbed with a name of crisis. Crisis in medicine. It's a metaphor taken from originally medical terminology and transferred on everything in life, on economics, politics, moment in warfare. What is uniting all this application is the underlying assumption that this is a moment of decision, and a very crucial decision, very crucial, very radical, decisive decision. Well, the nearest approximation of the idea of crisis is finding yourself on the crossroads. You can turn right, you can turn left. You are not absolutely sure which is the right road to take. The signposts are not very clear, and it may turn, the next step may be a step to the better, to the improvement, to the cure of the patient, or it may be as well the step taken to terminal agony and accelerating the process of demise. Well, how that applies to the situation of people who are doing politics, who are professionally engaged in politics, and people who are living through consequences of politics, consequences of political decisions taken and put in life. I think that very good authority in answering this question is the late President of Czech Republic, Václav Havel. Václav Havel was incredibly more aware of the inner workings of politics because he explored politics not from books, but from practice, and practice from everywhere. He spent many, many years of his life as a political prisoner in dungeons of politics, and many years in presidential palace, ruling a country. So he knows through and through what politics means. And he was pressed once to predict what will happen next. It was yet before the upheaval, before the fall of communism. He was pressed by this question, and his answer was, remember that Václav Havel was a poet, so he put his answer in a very beautiful metaphorical language. He said that, if you want to predict what will happen in future, you need to know what kind of songs the nation is ready to sing. Well, it's reference to the fact that all of us, rank and file members of society, are in a way not knowing even, not being aware of the consequences. We are constructing history while being constructed by it. But the next sentence pronounced immediately after by Václav Havel was the statement, but the trouble is, he said, that one cannot know what sort of songs the nation will wish to sing next year. Now that's the problem. We humans are unpredictable. We can turn one way or the other. We are the choosing creatures. And there are very many different factors which combine into it. And that's why you can predict very exactly the movement, the behavior of an electron or a positron, or you can predict also the reaction of very many animals, most of them, but predictions in relation to development of human history are known to be in great quantity left in the dustbin of history, never fulfilled. I myself went through a number of experiences of this kind when the prediction went wrong, and therefore I am doubly cautious not to repeat the same blunder now. Anyway, we are in this situation of crisis. It can turn one way or the other. And I repeat what I told you at the beginning. What I intend to do is to think aloud together with you how it happened that we found ourselves in this predicament, how we arrived, the road leading to this point, and the second, what sort of consequences are, namely, what sort of dilemmas we have to tackle, handle somehow, try to resolve in order to find an exit out of this situation of crisis. Well, I, ladies and gentlemen, invite you to join me in going back almost 5 centuries, where I believe it all started. Well, I warn you that history may be retold in very many different stories. Mine is just one of the stories. You can tell the story of our continent, Europe, in different ways, and probably each of the stories will contain a kernel of truth, but that's one selected by me, and I want to share it with you. I said more than 4 centuries back, almost 5 centuries, exactly to the year 1555. 1555 Europe was in enormous trouble, no comparison with the present trouble, really. It was continuous religious wars going on, devastating almost all of Western Europe. According to some computations, half of the population of Germanic lands at that time were destroyed during continuous religious war, and the epidemics, which were faithful accompaniment, faithful companion of war actions. Europe lay devastated. And in 50-55, there was the first attempt when the ruling dynasties of the greatest countries in Europe came together to the German town of Augsburg in order to find some formula, some way of stopping this killing each other, these mutual massacres which devastated Europe. Mutual massacres combined with natural catastrophes, with epidemics and so on, were agreed between population of Europe. They all agreed that that's punishment for human sins. God's punishment for human sins. What they disagreed, however, is which God punished the. It was the time of Reformation and Counter-Reformation, as you know, and therefore Europe was sharply divided between different conceptions of Christianity. Well, they came together to Augsburg and deliberated and came forward with a formula which is still, not in so many words, not openly, but deeply entrenched in our contemporary situation. Formula cuius regio eius religio. Cuius regio eius religio. That means whoever rules has the right to decide in which God his subordinates, his subjects ought to believe. Well, if that happens, then the countries, the states, the dynastic states of the time won't be split in the middle between warring factions and kill each other, but each religion, each belief will be separated territorially from others, and therefore perhaps the war will grind to a halt. It was 1555, but it took almost 100 years more of bloodshedding for this formula to be finally accepted and put into action. Actually, it happened in, I think, the milestone in European history, which was 1648. 1648. This time, the delegates of the ruling dynasties came to two German towns, not to Augsburg this time, but to Münster and Osnabrück, and finally came to the settlement. From now on, within the boundaries of a country, under one rule, on the territory of this country, only one religion will be allowed. All the others won't exist. One religion. The trouble before was that each of the denominations was monotheistic. It was based on the belief in one God, not many gods, but it lived, these monotheisms lived in a polytheistic surroundings. Now the attempt was to separate it. Each variety of monotheism enjoying its own sovereign territory. By the same token, some other things were put into political reality, political action. They were not straightforwardly mentioned, but they were natural consequences of the decision. Namely, the principle of sovereignty, the modern idea of sovereignty, the ability of the power to decide of all aspects of human life, and only self-limitation would delimit somehow, constrain the reach of this kind of legislation. And the second was the principle of territoriality, territorial sovereignty. territorial sovereignty. You go from one territory to another, you cross the border, you come under different kinds of rules, prescriptions and prohibitions, and at that time also beliefs. I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that we still live in the shadow of this decision. A decision which went into history under the name of Westphalian settlement. Westphalian settlement, because it was in the county of Westphalia where all these little towns which I spoke about were located. Westphalian settlement is still with us. Also, it went through historical transformations. Historical transformation. As you see, as you gather quite obviously from what I said so far, is that Westphalian settlement was born in a religious form. The stake of the game at that time was the question which God to believe in, which is the true God and which is false pretender. So apparently it was matter of religion, of beliefs. In fact, slowly it changed its character, it changed its nature. And I think that the next milestone in this history was the year 1755, exactly to the day, 200 years after the Augsburg First Meeting. 1755 was the next milestone. 1755, ladies and gentlemen, was the catastrophe of Lisbon. Catastrophe of Lisbon, well, you probably remember, even from your school education, that at that time Portugal was a very powerful empire, ruling over almost half of the South America continent. And Lisbon was one of the most powerful centers of business, of trade, but also of intellectual work, also of philosophy, of arts, and so on. And one of these foremost centers of European reasons for European pride of themselves, that was, after all, already in the middle of the Enlightenment era, when Europe looked around the rest of the world and came to the conclusion that, well, the kind of mindset, the kind of mentality, and the kind of laws, the kind of political arrangement, the kind of morality which we developed here in Europe is, in fact, in its nature, the universal future of mankind, universal future. The rest of the world will slowly accept the same way of life as clearly tested, as much advanced by comparison with the rest. And suddenly, Lisbon was destroyed in one day. First there was earthquake. Earthquake, unlike very many earthquakes, normal earthquakes is started and finished in a matter of seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute at the utmost. In fact, what destroyed Lisbon was 15 minutes long earthquake, unprecedented really in recorded history. In fact, it was not so much 15 minutes long earthquake as 3 consecutive earthquakes coming immediately, one after another. Already then, Lisbon lay in ruins. But then came what we would today call tsunami, namely the earthquake at the bottom of the sea, produced a tremendous tide, tremendous wave, which swept away whatever was left after the earthquake. And that was followed until this very day, not entirely clear reasons, by fire. Fire which continued for several days, and all the rest, whatever was there in Lisbon, was destroyed. Now, that set in motion the most powerful minds of Europe at that time. Philosophers of Enlightenment started quarreling. The most famous among them was the quarrel between Voltaire and Rousseau, what to do, the way to proceed. Rousseau wanted to go back to more safe, more secure times without all these modern novelties, all these developments, which created more dangers for human beings. Lisbonians were vulnerable because they built these modern houses. If they stayed in huts like before, it would be much better, and so on. Voltaire, of course, laughed at that, and he wanted to go forward. He looked forward to the accomplishment of human reason, of human science, and so on. But they all agreed. They differed in views, but they all agreed on one point. They all agreed on the point that it is nonsense to believe that the disasters are the punishment for human sins, simply because neither tsunami nor the earthquake and not the fires selected sinners from people good behaving. They punish everybody exactly the same way. They were not abiding by the divine or human principles of morality, that the good deeds should be awarded and bad things, evil things should be punished. Nature was blind. Nature got creation, okay, but it was blind. It distributed its blows right and left without any logic and without any principles. Which means that so far the world is not a finished product. It requires quite a lot of extra investment and extra thinking. And most importantly, forget about the blind faith which will shape our future and take the world over under human management. That was the effect. This decision, to a very great extent, was made obvious, obligatory in a sense, because of the fresh impression, disastrous impression of the Lisbon destruction. Well, very great upheaval. The very arrogant decision to take world under human management. It's a tremendous upheaval, really. It's a watershed in history, that's true. But the interesting point is that the formula how to do it was already inherited from Westphalian settlement. The formula cuius regio, eius religio. The only thing to replace in this formula was, instead of religio, put natio, the nation. Cuius regio, eius natio. The nation state was born. Nation state was born. The nation state was born. The whole mindset has changed in accordance with this birth, because instead of justifying, explaining the right to rule by anointment from superhuman power, now the ruler had to legitimize himself by consent of his subjects. Consent of his subjects. They were either electing him or at least agreeing to his rule. That was the principle. And the nation-building era started. Nation-building era, and that needs to be emphasized very strongly, ran parallel with the modern state-building era. They were two processes intertwined. One could not go ahead without the other. The nation needed the state, the power of the state, the right to apply coercive methods in order to win, to establish its own security, in front of competition coming from other ethnic groups, which also pretended to the role of the ruling nation. Ernest Gellner, one of the greatest anthropologists of 20th century, pointed out that when at the start of the nation-building era, there were at least 9 or 10 candidates for every place of the sovereign state. Nations needed the state to legislate and to deploy its monopoly on means of coercion, as one of the founders of sociology, Max Weber, pointed out, that modern state is distinguished by its monopoly on the power of coercion, which is no longer true. Marginally, I must point out, because we already have privatized prisons, privatized security services, and all sorts of other things like that. So monopoly is not here, but then it was in place, really, and the nation needed it. What sort of legislation it needed? Well, take Spain. I don't know how many languages are spoken even before the contemporary wave of immigration to Spain. I counted several. There was Spanish, Galician, Basque, Valencian, Catalan, of course, and even Leonese. Yeah, there is a language called Leonese. Instead of these many languages, there should be some sort of an academy of language which pronounces authoritatively which of these languages is the language of the state and which are simply local dialects. Writing a curriculum of teaching history. How do you write it? From which point of view? I already mentioned to you that you can tell history in very many different stories. So from which point of view, from which perspective, this story is to be told to every child in the country in order to develop this feeling of belonging, of being a member of community. Well, calendars even were provincial. Even calendars were, every province had its own calendar, its own list of festivals, remembering the past, remembering the great events in history. Now, instead of that, there should be one calendar for the whole country, for the whole territory, and so on and so on. Just that is very, very demands, very, very needs, which the rising and maturing national communities needed from the state. That is why we speak of nation-state, which are simply two aspects of the same phenomenon, two aspects of the same process. And the state needed the nation, It can't refer to divine anointment any longer in justifying its right to demanding discipline from the citizens. It couldn't. That was out of the question. There was a need for different kinds of legitimation. And the legitimation that we all belong to one national community, we share the past, and we share our future. We are all in the same boat. We have to behave in a friendly manner to each other, join forces, march in the same direction, and so on. Now, that was in the name of patriotism, in the way of love for your community in which you were born, which is yours of right. The state could demand the discipline, the obedience to the laws of the country. So the nation-states were born out of the dozens of little princedoms and fürstendoms and so on. Germany was created under very many kingdoms and princedoms. Italy was created, and the general trend was towards creating a nation state deserving sovereignty. I was pointing out that the question of Westphalian Agreement and aftermath was the question of sovereignty, of the right to have things done and the ability to have things done at the same time. Now, you needed quite a lot of resources to deserve such sovereignty. The political sovereignty was based on a tripod, in a sense, on a tripod. On a tripod, one leg of this tripod was the economic autarky. The state ought to be in sufficient possession of resources to supply the needs of its nation. Then there was the military autarky, another leg. Military autarky means that the country should be able to defend its citizens against enemies from outside or penetrating inside or whatever. And the third leg of this tripod of sovereignties, of autarchies, was the cultural leg, where all the formulas of daily life which are necessary to make it orderly and adequate to human needs ought to be also supplied within this country. Another assumption connected with the vision of nation-state was that nation-state has everything to secure this kind of autarchies, this kind of groundings for its sovereignty. It has, above all, two things which are necessary to make any decision work. One is power. Power means the ability to have things done. And politics, that is the ability to decide which of the things ought to be done and which ought to be rejected or neglected. Now, nations, to have both things in one hand, it must have been a big state. Now, just one number. League of Nations, which was the global institution before the Second World War, had 36 members. Only 36 entities deserved to be recognized as sovereign states in this sense. Now, United Nations have over 200, which means that the demands for sovereignty, for the conditions of so-called sovereign territory, fell down quite considerably since then. But at least at that time, the assumption was that nation-state having at its disposal sufficient resources, cultural, military, economic, is able to actually put into operation the principle of territorial sovereignty. What has happened, ladies and gentlemen, since then is simply that territorial sovereignty, to a very great extent today, is a fiction. But it is a fiction which we live through daily. We act on the assumption that it is still in place, that it is still working. Even after the Second World War, United Nations were created. That was our father's reaction to the horrors of the massive massacre performed by the warring armies in Second World War. The United Nations were instructed what to do. There was a charter they received. And under this charter, United Nations still work today. There were no changes. And the charter says that the task of United Nations is to defend tooth and nail the unencroachable, inalienable sovereignty of every state on its territory. Well, if people were people remembering still what was written there, United Nations could be accused of false pretenses, or acting on false pretenses, because clearly the principle of allowing every local sovereign to have absolute, unrestricted power over its citizens is neither a realistic proposition today, nor we are willing to observe it in the era of the human rights. Well, the major change which happened, which made the principle of territorial sovereignty to a great extent a illusion, a fiction, was the process of globalization. And the process of globalization consisted or brought about the process which can be only called known under the name of divorce between power and politics. Power and politics, which were allegedly held in the same hands, resided in the same household of the nation state, parted ways. A lot of state power evaporated upward in the space which great Spanish sociologist Manuel Castells calls the space of flows, while politics, the activities, the institutions which allow us, which served us to decide which things ought to be done, politics remains local as before. Powers are already global, politics remains local, confined to the framework, to the boundaries of one taken apart state. What is decided in Barcelona is valid only in the boundaries of Catalonia. What is decided in Madrid only in the boundaries of Spain. What is decided in London is valid only in Great Britain, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. While powers having become global and floating in the space of flows, have the privilege of ignoring what the local residents of one or another country prefer, what they would rather have to be done. Ignore it. They can transgress quite easily the boundaries. They can run away if the territory is too arrogant for them and the things become too hot. And so they always can find another place on the globe where the government is much more hospitable to their interest, and the working labor is not so, keeping their noses up. They are not joining trade unions. They are not fighting. They are not going on strike, and they are ready to work for $2 a day, for example. So power is out there, unreachable by the only political institutions which we have at our disposal. Well, the talk is about Europe, and Europe is doubly affected by this new turn of events. What I said so far applies to not only to European states, European countries, but virtually to every place on the planet. Not a single country can really, with certainty, with clear conscience, say that they are the lords of the house, that they are deciding fully, completely, about what course of action should be taken in their own country. They can't say that. They can't say that. They must look behind their shoulder. When they make a decision, they must nervously wait till Monday when the stock exchanges reopen, and only then they will know what the result of their decisions was. Is it positive or negative? Have they to retreat, or can they go ahead? That applies to everybody. But in Europe, you have these two tiers, so to speak, of organization. Two tiers of organization. Two floors, which not unionized countries do not experience, but members of European Union do. Every nation state is today, one would say, under what I call, taking the metaphor from classics of psychology, double bind, under pressures, contradictory pressures from two different sides, pressures which are not easily, if at all, reconcilable. One is the pressure of own population. On population, we are living in democratic countries, and every government is dependent on its voters. So no government whose length of life is 4 years at the utmost. Every 4 years you have elections of new governments. So no government can play down the what songs people are ready to sing. It cannot neglect the wishes of its population. Must make promises at least that the demands of the electors will be met. Promises which, however, that's the trouble, it doesn't have the power to fulfill. Why? Because of the divorce between power and politics. Because on the other side, it has to reckon also with the behavior of these anonymous multinational forces which float in the cyberspace. And they actually decide how realistic the decisions and promises made by the local governments are. They are local governments because, I repeat, their entitlements are limited to the territory of within their single state boundaries. And that applies to every country. And now you have Europe. Europe up there, above the level of the nation state, but in a double role. On the one hand, it has been created in order to provide a safety armor, so to speak, for the single nations. Single nations are small. On their own, they could hardly tackle the issues of the global scale. They could hardly withstand the cutthroat competition between trade, financial investment, and other multinational, supranational companies. If we all come together, then perhaps, who knows, we will be able to create another powerful entity, political entity, and reunite somehow this political ability with power abilities equal to the task. We would be, all of us, Europeans, members of the European Union, that much less secure without European Union. We will be in much more difficulty withstanding the pressures of the world capitals, world finances, world trade, and so on. Take into account that already 1/3 of the global produce is made by supranational companies which don't belong to any particular country. And 2/3 of the global trade is also handled by multinational or supranational companies occupying residing in the cyberspace. By comparison, the strength of even such powerful country like the United States is limited. They can't really make decisions, even internal decisions, without reckoning with the reactions of the global stock exchanges, for example, without reckoning with the movement of capitals. If capitals don't like the conditions in a particular country, there's no obstacle to them moving away and going in another place. So double pressure. One role of European Union, planned role, assumed role, was to mitigate this pressure, just to mediate between the pressure from outside and the wishes of the population, of the nations constituting European Union. Yes, that's true. And if you really think seriously about the situation, world situation today, you will conclude that to some extent, well, not completely, not 100%, but to some extent, the European Union makes the preservation of individual identity of every member state, of every member nation, that much more easier. But when looked from the perspective of the national legislators, legislators of one state, who are subject to election by people living only within this territorial sovereignty, from their perspective, it's not like that. People of Europe see the European decisions as some sort of conductor for the external pressures. Europe is inside, is our friend, and Europe is suspect of conspiring against national interests under the pressures of the international or supranational capitals, labor markets, and so on. And the worst thing is that both statements are partly right. Both roles of Europe are performed. It must impose, if it wants to survive Europe as a unit, economic and political unit, it must impose certain limitation on the freedom of action of national governments. And on the other hand, it does it in a name to enhance, to increase the national, the state chances of survival and making secure their own national identities. Double role. It's an objective contradiction. It's not invented by one or another politician. It is there. It is there because of the situation of the world, which I described to you very briefly, oversimplified way, as double bind. The presence of Europe as another floor above already double bind at the level of nation state adds third dimension, so to speak, third dimension to this predicament, and it is very difficult to decide because elements of one and the other are all both contained in this third dimension. It's very difficult to decide in which favor, for whom, for whose good the third dimension has been introduced. Was it introduced to increase the pressure on our freedom, or on the contrary, is it there in order to enhance our freedom of action, to have more resources, to have more chances of implementing the designs, the plans, which we construe in order to improve our own life and everybody around life. That's quite a real objective ambivalence, and Europe has to act under this ambivalent situation. This is why you have pro-Europeans, you have European skeptics, you have the phenomenon when less and less people are in love with the European Union. More and more people would rather limit the entitlements of European institutions, or even, if possible, to separate itself, to exit from the European Union. Even such voices are heard, and you hear them in the country which I inhabit, Great Britain, rising in force, rising in power. Why? Because of perspective. It is we are in Europe seeing the rest of the world and the global forces through the prism of Europe, because they are recycled before they reach us. They are recycled, slightly reformed at the level of the Brussels administration or the Council of Europe. So it is very easy, let's say, old human custom from time immemorial to blame the messenger for the message. And Europe acts in this case as the messenger. I'm not implying that every decision taken by European institutions is right. I am not arguing that the combination of refinancing the banks and imposing austerity on the clients of banks who are dispossessed from their property is the right decision. I am not suggesting that. I am not opting. I am not taking sides. What I am saying that whoever is representing Europeans in European institutions will be exposed to this double bind. And we have to maneuver within this framework. That's the objective situation. Why? Because whether at the level of nation state or at the level of European Union, we are all forced by the negative globalization which is going on, we are all forced to look for local solutions to globally produced problems. And there are, ladies and gentlemen, no local solutions to globally produced problems. There can be only global solutions to globally produced problems. You can't save yourself alone, singly, from problems which are globally produced. It's as simple as that. So that's an objective situation. And that brings me to the third role which Europe is confronted with, willy-nilly, knowingly or unknowingly, but is confronted. From what I said just a moment ago, what follows is that we need to seek the global political means adequate on the match with already global powers. We need to look for global solutions to globally produced problems. We Europeans and everybody else actually on Earth. Europe is not for the first time in this situation, mind you. Look back into 18th, 19th century, doctrine of nation building. People lived until then in local communities. And by local communities, then one didn't understand the realm of a dynasty, but really locality within the reach of individual human person in the era where not only iPads and iPods did not exist, but there were no trains, no cars, no planes, so most people were born and died in the framework of 15 miles or 15 kilometers, and never wandering far away from there unless they were joining the army. Europe was actually controlled, and decisions were selected at that level, at the local level, What has happened in late of 18 and the whole 19th century and part of 20th century was what again already quoted Max Weber called the separation of business from household. Separation of business from household. Business until the birth of modern era was a family affair. Normally workshops were in the family house, and every member of the family was co-employed inside it. And inside the community, different workshops were tied together by craftsman guild, by local institutions, parish priest, the lord of the manor, the judge of peace, so-called, and so on, all within the reach of sight, in a sense, face-to-face based community. But when one's business moved away from this tightly knit network of relationship, it found itself into no man's land, which was not ruled about, which was not under control of any political and moral forces, because, as I said already a moment ago, the moral considerations and political instruments were all confined in the local community. Once business moved away from household, it also moved away from community because it was tied to community through the household workshop. The whole 19th century was dedicated in European history to the emerging modern state, developing, trying to colonize, to take under control this no man's land in which the business found itself more or less secure from every other considerations apart from consideration of the interest and business and profits. There was an uphill struggle, very difficult struggle, against enormous opposition from the places. The struggle to transplant, so to speak, the feeling of belonging, the human loyalty to the local community, transfer it to the abstract community, imagined community of the state. Great leap, enormously faithful, and at that time, still beyond the imagination of very many people living there. It was not an easy struggle, it was long war, it was a whole series of electoral bills, and the endless series of factory bills, factory laws, and so on, administrative reforms, and so on, were to be introduced in order to accomplish this effect. The two great world wars were culmination of this process, when people went to die, not because in the defense of their dear and near, but for the king and the country. Well, that was the story of the first great leap in European history. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Europe and the rest of the world faces the need of the second leap, similar leap, much more difficult, much more difficult than before, than the first one. Leap reaching the globality, which is already a condition of the powers which decide our life. Much again, politics and power with each other, making possible our collective human control on our own future. But to do just that, something quite unimaginable today, just as unimaginable was the imagined community of the nations, modern nation state, unimaginable today is patriotism of humanity. Humanity as a whole. Imagined totality of the human race. Something equivalent to the mindset and institutions to match the mindset which our grandfathers and great-grandfathers developed for the service of the nation state. We haven't started yet in earnest building the global equivalent of the nation state democratic political institutions. We haven't started it yet in seriousness. Sooner or later we will have to grasp this nettle. No one doubts, I think, well, if one doubts, then it doesn't testify well to his or her reason, but I think that no one doubts that the road won't be covered with roses, with flowers. It will be a very difficult road, and it will, let us hope, be finalized with good results, but the road leading there will be full of drudgery and probably also needs of a lot of sacrifice. The third role, apart from providing the safety network, so to speak, the protective armor to the identities of the member states, and mitigating the pressure coming from outside the world on the European nations. The third role, which is played by Europe, consists, ladies and gentlemen, in, could be compared to a huge laboratory in which the instruments, the stratagems, the expedients, the strategies which are most needed for the whole of the world to survive jointly or to avoid joint shared perdition. Now, these instruments will be necessary, are experimented with, first of all designed, then experimented with, put in place, put to the test. Some of them are rejected, some of them are accepted. That is what Europe daily does, whether we know it or not. We are a huge laboratory now, in which the ability of stepping beyond the principle of social integration at the level of nation state, beyond that, beyond this traditional foundation, reach of the traditional foundations which supported this sort of solidarity, this sort of integration. Now, these instruments, if we find them, will give quite enormously positive service to the rest of humanity. Because that is what for humanity as large, finding such ways, finding the ways of adjusting our mode of life to the new reality which took us unawares and is very much ahead of our contemporary ability to intervene. Now, how the humanity needs these means, these ways of doing just that to be elaborated. And let's hope that from the point of view, from the perspective of future historians, this period which we are now going it, will be recorded not as the pains of agony, but the pains of birth. Very difficult birth. Caesarean cut will be probably necessary, but nevertheless, birth which will give to new ways of togetherness. New ways of togetherness. For example, based on friendly cooperation instead of international competition. Something like that. It has been done already, to the great extent, here in Europe. Could you imagine, before the European Union did its work, Germans and French sitting at the same table and amicably discussing matters to mutual benefit and so on? Europe was for many centuries, many centuries, taught its inhabitants how to hate their neighbors. Europe was the site of endless conflicts, some conflicts going back hundreds of years. And in a matter of few decades, Europe transformed the international relations completely in Europe. I will end on personal note. When I was a child, it was before the Second World War, long time ago, I lived in Poland, and Poland, I remember, was surrounded by enemies only. There was not one single friendly borderline along borders of Poland. And I was afraid, as a child, I remember myself very frightened. Everybody felt that war is coming, and just the idea that on all sides we are surrounded by enemies, there are no friends around, was disastrous. It was the nightmare of my youth, of my children years. Now Poland has not a single boundary with an enemy, and no single enemy army is preparing to invade. Now that is roughly the difference, and that's an enormous difference. If we manage to do the same on a larger scale, make the second leap from local community to nation state was the first one, and from nation state to humanity, now that would be the greatest achievement in history of mankind.
Bé, farem ara, si ho desitgen, una mica de col·loqui, en el sentit de ell contestarà les preguntes que es plantegin, i el que els agrairé molt és que em facin senyals i jo aniré donant torns de paraules. Esclar, els que no són a la sala, pobres, no podran fer senyals. Però això de moment no es pot arreglar.
Bon vespre, senyor Bauman. Fa uns dies li vaig sentir en una entrevista que li van fer a Barcelona.
It's being interrupted, but right? Yes,
Deia que fa pocs dies li vaig sentir en una entrevista que li van fer a Barcelona parlar sobre el que ha parlat avui en aquest discurs, sobre el divorci de la política i la societat. I vostè deia una frase molt interessant que era: quan jo era jove ens preguntàvem què volíem, però no qui ho faria, perquè confiàvem, deia vostè, en que qui té el poder ho farà. La meva pregunta és: no creu vostè que el problema encara va més enllà i que el que passa és que la societat en general no sap què vol, i en tot cas si sap què vol no va en el sentit que ha dit vostè d'aquesta necessitat de comunitat universal, sinó que en els països desenvolupats, que diem desenvolupats com a Europa, l'Europa que hem creat, la majoria de la societat ara en crisi es veu clarament com el que vol és, o bé, una gran part, recuperar el poder adquisitiu per poder seguir consumint, o bé, ni es planteja què vol ni què sap, perquè és una classe social totalment desinformada, que no té cap consciència de classe i no sap directament què vol. Aquesta és la meva pregunta.
Well, it's a very important question you ask. I think that I'm very grateful that you raised this issue. I agree with you, what you said. in first part, that namely that there is falling trust not only in one or another political party, but in political system as such, because government after government after government after government keep doing the same thing, not delivering on their promises. And more people are voting today, mostly not because they have a vision of the future, as you suggested. Yes, they don't have vision of the future. They are guided by frustration, by government promising something, not delivering. So they are bringing into power opposition only to become turn of the opposition to be removed from power when it comes to the next election. Very few governments, if any, survive 2 elections in a row. So that's what's happening. Now, you raised the second problem in your question, very important problem, much more difficult to answer than the first one. Namely, people don't know what they want. That what you mean? We don't have today an image of a good society, an ideal, a utopia, some vision, a model of society which would prefer to put into reality. I suspect that part of the responsibility for this state of affairs, that we stopped thinking about the model of good society, comes from the fact that we couldn't answer the question, okay, if we invent the model of good society, who is going to do it? Precisely because of the falling trust in the existing political system. We are no longer believing in the state ability to deliver. And that's why people experiment with alternative ways. They are going to public places, indignados, occupy towns for a time being, trying to create some forms of direct democracy, unmediated democracy, and put into oblivion the hundreds of years of representative democracy. They don't believe in that possibility any longer, and so on, so on. So you push us, and quite rightly so, you are impatient, and call us to start thinking again about an alternative way of doing our life, which would bring more satisfaction to life. And that is because there is such necessity that I suggested to you that the road to the solution is likely to be very thorny, very difficult, very difficult. It will require quite a lot of sacrifice, because what stands, among other things, on our way to handle, and we haven't begun yet to handle, is the 200 years old principle that road to every solution of every social problem leads through the increase in economic growth. Economic growth. The economic growth is the primary condition of solution to any social problem. Behind this belief, behind this institutionalized belief, because we already created a network of institutions which serve precisely this idea, the hidden tacit assumption behind it is that economic growth can go on infinitely, that the planet is able to supply virtually everything our rising demand and our rising desires, our rising wishes will require. According to some calculations, there are many competitive calculations, but one seems to be quite decent and quite authoritative. We already consume daily 1.5 of the planet, which means that we consume more 50% more than the planet is able to deliver without being destroyed, without deteriorating. 1.5. And according to some other calculations, in the matters of 40 years time, and that is within your life, if we go on as we're going now with this ideology of continuous economic growth, we will need not 1.5 planet, but 5 planets. 5 planets. And there is very little chance that we will find far more planets in the next 40 years. The second thing which needs to be renegotiated, but is one of the foundations of our contemporary model of life, is the assumption that all roads to human happiness lead through shopping. Shopping. The rise of consumption. Happiness means more consuming more, and more sophisticated, more interesting, more fascinating objects. We are slowly forgetting about the ways of becoming happy, not necessarily by going to a shop, but by chatting with a neighbor, by enjoying family life, by cooperating in improving your own vicinity, in working for your community, and hundreds of other ways. The very joy of what traditional orthodox ways of becoming happy and pursuing happiness have been all but de-learned. We forgot them, how to do it. For us, the only substitute for all other roads to happiness is going for shopping, and as often as possible. Now you can do it even sitting quietly at home because you have internet buying, so you don't even go shopping, but one way or another, it is mediated by increased and diversified consumption. Now that also makes for unsustainable mode of life. We can't go on like that for much longer. And every intelligent person understands it deep in their heart, but nevertheless, we go on behaving as if we didn't know it, And all the powers of earth, power of persuasion, power of enforcement, and power of temptation, power of seduction, power of mass media, power of commercial interest are going in the same direction, to encourage us to go ahead as we have done so far. And that makes what you are asking for particularly imperative, really. We need to sit down, to reflect, take a long, cool look on the way we live, and just try to think again about the model of society which is livable, which is hospitable to human happiness, and which is at the same time sustainable.
Merci és una mica continuant amb la resposta que ha donat i també lligant-ho amb la seva exposició. Bàsicament...
Now it's better.
Vale.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Sure, yeah. Bàsicament, la crisi a Europa o les forces que empenyen la política europea, per lo que he entès, hi ha la part humana o la part humanista, que d'alguna forma també ha sigut la raó d'Europa, i després, d'una altra banda, tot aquest poder. D'alguna forma ha parlat de poder d'una forma separada de govern. Aleshores, si el poder al final és el poder econòmic, tot el que ha dit vostè està molt bé, jo ho comparteixo totalment, però això és des d'un punt de vista molt individual de modificar els nostres estils de vida per tal de viure més sosteniblement. Però de quina manera podem conciliar una altra vegada poder i governament i societat civil? O sigui, com la societat civil pot donar o enfrontar aquest poder econòmic que d'alguna forma és una mica la causant de la crisi, i com, o sigui, perquè al final penso que deu ser una crisi de valors, no? Si aquests ens movem per valors diferents, humans i econòmics, potser la solució és tornar a donar la importància real als humans en comptes dels econòmics, i com la societat civil pot fer que poder torni a estar en les seves mans en comptes del poder econòmic. Gràcies.
Well, again, I can agree with most of what you said, and it's true that the present crisis has many dimensions. I try to name some of them. I doubt whether I exhausted the list. The list is long, but you mentioned crisis of values. Yes, absolutely sure. A moment ago I spoke about idea of pursuit of happiness leading invariably through shops, and other ways of pursuing happiness being forgotten. That's also crisis of values. The problem of which we confront in our value horizons for the first time in history. For the first time, the geologists are saying that we enter new geological epoch. They call it Anthropocene. Anthropocene, meaning that we the human kind, the human race, the human species, are the major factor influencing the geological future of our Earth. Now, that is a new problem which we haven't yet recycled teleologically from the point of view of values. We don't know how to handle it. So there is crisis of values, but behind all that, there is a very, very big question. When I was young, I'm terribly sorry, the old people normally like reminisce about their young years. I am not an exception. When I was young, my colleagues, my generation, quarreled tremendously about what needs to be done, but I don't remember any quarrels about who is going to do it, because everybody was convinced that once they know what to do, then the state will do it. State has everything necessary to do things properly. Today we have a situation in which on one hand we have power, the really decisive power which shapes our collective future, shapes the life prospects of our children and grandchildren. Power which is exempted from any kind of political control, which is free to follow solely its own consideration, its own calculation of interest. On one hand, power exempt from political control. On the other hand, you have politics, which suffers constantly of the deficit of powers. Now, until we bring them again together, I think no resolute action is possible. We will go on fighting one crisis after another until such a moment when we will be missing all the strength, all the ability, all the imagination to continue the fight. That's the only alternative. We need to do, that's one prediction which I will risk, that the rest of your life will be dedicated to the attempts of bringing together power and politics now living in divorce. The question whether it can be reconstituted, this marriage, this wedding, played for the second time at the level of nation state, now that's a moot question. Problems are already global. So who knows, perhaps this remarriage will be held in some sort of a global church. You know, it is closer to heaven. Every marriage is, in a sense, made in heaven. So this marriage clearly will have to be done like that. I'm not joking. I'm quite serious. It sounds comical to some extent because of the distance which lies between us and the finishing of the effort. But nevertheless, until we start doing something about it, we cannot, all other urgent problems will be hanging in the thin air. That is the key to the future of humanity.
Bé, moltes gràcies per la seva conferència. És un verdader privilegi tenir-lo avui entre nosaltres. La meva pregunta va referida a una expressió que vostè ha utilitzat, que és la del doble vincle. Vostè deia aquesta situació en la que estan els països europeus, els governs europeus, s'assembla a la que els psicòlegs descriuen com a doble vincle. El que vostè no ens ha dit és que el doble vincle se situa a l'origen de l'esquizofrènia en la psicologia clàssica. I jo li volia dir que l'esquizofrènia, per guarir una malaltia com aquesta de la que vostè ens evocava, es necessita algun tipus de tractament o de teràpia, o que hi hagi algun fet fortuït que produeixi el trencament d'aquesta situació doble vincular. Ja sé que vostè ens ha dit que no és profeta, però sí que m'agradaria que ens digués una mica més d'on pensa que pot venir aquest trencament de la situació doble vincular. Jo crec que hi ha un patiment, diguem-ne, psíquic generalitzat, hi ha moltíssima por, hi ha moltíssima angoixa, la població en general, estem espantats, angoixats, és un moment en què qui més qui menys parla de por. L'altre dia al Twitter hi havia un tuit que deia l'home està format per 2/3 d'aigua i 1/3 de por. Potser aquesta por i aquesta angoixa estan causades per aquesta situació doble vincular. La meva pregunta és, vostè veu d'on ha de sortir la força per trencar aquesta situació doble vincular? Moltes gràcies.
Well, I hope that I explain in the context of my lecture why I am not in the business of counseling or prophesizing. I don't have solutions. I didn't come here to tell you what you have to do, what you must do. I try simply to paint a canvas. What is the landscape today and what you have to take into account, whatever you decide to do. But in the end, it will depend not on my counseling. It would be just one voice among many. It will depend, as Václav Havel said, on what songs people will want to sing next year and the year after and the year after and the year after. Not being a prophet, I can't answer this question. Now, you mentioned schizophrenia. Double bind, yes, coincides in Professor Sass, for example, teachings with the idea schizophrenia with double bind. Double pressure, which he found in average families, is behind the psychological ailment called schizophrenia, which by the way is questioned by very many psychologists today. There are psychologists, psychiatrists who doubt whether there is such a disease called schizophrenia, or was it simply an artificial conceptual invention. But I agree that being under double pressure, and when the pressures are going in opposite direction, people are squirming, really. They are in a very troublesome situation. They have to serve two lords at the same time, to promote two values at the same time. And values, one of the questionnaires mentioned the importance of crisis of values, but values also are guilty partly for our tendency to schizophrenia, if there is such a thing as schizophrenia. Take, for example, the value of security and value of freedom. They are both extremely important values. You can't imagine a decent human life without both at the same time. You have to be secure and you have to be free. But how to reconcile them? If you want more freedom, you have to surrender part of your security. If you want more security, you need to surrender part of your freedom. We are constantly turn between these two desires, two values which are equally important, but which cannot be, like English say, you can't have a cake and eat it. Either you have it or you eat it, but you can't have both. Now, the same applies to the world of values. I'm very grateful to you that you mentioned fear. Fear is one of my central objects in my investigations, really. I even produced a book, Liquid Fear, and which says, well, first of all, it is about the importance of the feeling, of the sentiment of fear in contemporary life, daily life. And secondly, it was the pointing out, an attempt to point out how distinct is contemporary fear from the old style fears, which you remember from the past. What is unique, what is new, if anything, in the contemporary fears? My suggestion was that what is new here is that our fears are diffuse. They are threatening, they are not fixed to the place. They are threatening from under-defined, under-recognized, under-theorized places, from all sides. They come by surprise, without warning. They keep you, they capture you unprepared normally for their coming. The advantage, in a sense, if you can speak of advantage in this respect, of the old style fears, was that they were anchored fears, fixed fears. You knew what to be afraid of. When you sent your child to school, you knew that the fear, that what you should be afraid of are the wolves. So if there were wolves in the forest, you had to kill them in order to save your children, and then you could send them to school. I was walking to school always alone because there were no wolves in the streets. Now there are international terrorists, there are crazy men, local of all origin, who come and destroy the whole class or the whole school in one go. They are scattered, fears, and we are actually fed all the time new information about unexpected fears which we didn't know before. So we are kept in fear because being afraid is very good business. The companies may earn quite a lot on our feeling of insecurity and dispersed, scattered, diffuse, underdetermined, underdefined fears. They can suggest ever new fears. We learn daily, virtually, about poison we never heard about, poison which we thought were good for us, were recommended to consume them. Now we learn that they are carcinogenic. We learn about diseases which we never were worried about. For example, eyebrows falling out are now proclaimed to be an organic disease, but fortunately there is a pharmaceutical company which provides you with a medicine, so you can only buy the medicine to chase away the fear. But it won't make you immune to further fears will come. And besides, let us leave the consumerist market for a moment. Your job, however powerful job you occupy at the moment, is organically, endemically insecure, something which didn't happen before. You trusted your company to which you gave your services, you trusted with life expectation much longer than your own. So you will retire in 40 years' time, giving reward for faithful service, this sort of thing. Now suddenly the company with jobs without warning disappear and is moved to India, moved to Bangladesh, moved to anywhere else, but leaving Girona, leaving Spain, leaving Europe. Human bonds once upon a time, that at least was secure. Very nasty could be. Sometimes living with the same partner for life could be a very nasty experience. I'm not suggesting that every marriage was happy marriage, but from the point of view of security, it was secure. It was made for life, until death do us part. So at least from there, there was no danger coming. But now danger is every nook and cranny. They are diffuse. And that's why on one side, they are so haunting and incurable. We are getting rid of one fear only to fall into another. And on the other hand, they are incessant source of rising income from all sorts of pharmaceutical shops. Mind you, all shops are selling different commodities. They are specialty shops. But all shops share one feature. They are all, in a sense, pharmacies. They sell you the feeling of security. They sell you salvation from your current fear and your current anxiety.
Em sembla que haurem d'anar per acabar, diríem, perquè i agrair absolutament l'exhibició d'energia a favor nostre que ha fet el professor Bauman. Vull tornar a agrair al Centre Cultural La Mercè la gran oportunitat que ens ha donat a tots aquest vespre. Thank you very much, Professor Bauman. It has been an extraordinary privilege to have you here and to have the opportunity to listen at your heterodox words. Thank you very much.
Thank you.